Now, former President Kgalema Motlanthe says South Africa needs answers and solutions to its problems as soon as yesterday. Now, these include answers on what President Cyril Ramaphosa knows about the robbery at his Phala farm in Limpopo. Motlanthe made these remarks in a wide-ranging exclusive interview with our politics editor Lukhanyo Chalata earlier today. As promised, here's that conversation in its entirety.
Thank you so very much. And yes, we are today speaking to the former Deputy President of the country, Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe, who of course was also once served as the Deputy President of the African National Congress. Sir, thank you so very much for joining us and for your time, of course. I'd like to start off by talking about the African National Congress, particularly the nomination processes that are currently underway. They aren't going as they should at the moment, are they?
Well, there are rules for nominations, and those rules were adopted by the National Executive Committee in July, and that process is unfolding. The rules stipulate that nominations ought to be done by branches. And once the branches have nominated, the consolidation following a tallying process would then take place at provincial level.
But that's not what we're seeing, Mr. Deputy President, in that now we are seeing provincial executive councils making pronouncements on their candidates or their preferred candidates even before processes have been concluded at branch level.
Well, that's an expression of their wishes, but it's not the final thing. The final pronouncement of the provincial positions would be after the consolidation of the wishes of the branches.
But isn't that a bit of an anomaly, Deputy President, when the Provincial Executive Council pronounces and says, well, we want candidate X. So what if the branches then say, but hello, we want president or candidate Y? Isn't there a bit of a clash as to ultimately who then gets nominated by a certain province?
Well, there isn't a clash because the last word rests with the branches. Remember, they are not only mandated to nominate, 90% of voting delegates at conference itself come from branches. Yeah.
All right. I'll come back to a question around how we're going to monitor the issue of expenditure on campaigns. But I think while we are at the branches, in 2007, you were Secretary General, and 2012 as well as 2017, the diagnostic reports that were presented before those elective conferences spoke of branches that weren't up to standard. For instance, I remember there was phrases such as a lack of ideological debate and discussion, which ultimately has led to a moral degeneration. Can we trust branches where there isn't ideological discussion to be able to nominate the best candidates to lead the African National Congress and maybe even the country?
Well, there's no other choice really other than to rely on the branches, because that's in other words, their nominations would be an expression of the will of the general membership, because that's the only structure where each and every member has the opportunity to participate in the life of the organization. Of course, some branches are not properly constituted, but these processes of nominations are taking place following the decision by the National Executive Committee on those of them that qualify, therefore, to hold BBGMs and do the nominations here. So that the National Executive Committee has conducted the survey and approved those that are in good standing.
Is the NEC happy or satisfied with the level of discussion that's taking place within the branch itself?
I don't think they would be satisfied with the level of discussions. However, the reality is that the leadership, even at branch level, consist of people who are properly engaged. Of course, it would have enriched the debates and discussions were it that all the members who are in good standing were to attend and participate. Yeah.
I believe it was 1991 when the African National Congress adopted through the eye of the needle. Is that document something that branches engage with on a really deep and meaningful level? And I'll ask you why I'm asking that question, but can I just get an answer to that first?
Yeah, through the eye of the needle is part of the current rules for nominations. In fact, in the rules, it's stipulated that before the branches start with the nominations, part of the document through the eye of the needle should be discussed, and that the part of the rules also indicate the importance of the National Executive Committee as a structure, and therefore the caliber of and moral standing of people who should serve in that structure, because they would be not only representing themselves or the membership of the ANC, but also the South Africans beyond the structures of the ANC and the membership of the ANC. So that rule is meant to drive home the understanding that this task of nominating and electing members of the National Executive Committee is very, very important. Yeah.
And that it's not actually a popularity contest.
It's not a popularity contest, yeah. That's why, they have to look at several attributes. Yeah.
All right. To come back to that question then, as to, because this isn't a popularity contest, because we know that the branches aren't necessarily discussing the kinds of things that they should be doing, are we, as a country, how assured should we be that the best within the African National Congress will be elected to ultimately lead us as a society?
Well, you don't have long to wait, really. By December, you will know when the elections have taken place, because then you will see by the caliber of men and women who would have been elected onto the National Executive Committee as to whether they are true representatives of the best that are available, at least within the African National Congress, or not. That judgment, is left to the general populace to make here.
Just two things from me on this, Deputy President, and then we'll move on to the next one. We've seen something quite interesting emerging within the African National Congress, I would say over the last two, maybe three elective conferences, is that individuals that are actively campaigning for certain positions, for the position that you once held of Deputy President, position of President, from where some of us are standing, it seems a very foreign concept within the African National Congress. Is it to you?
Well, there was a time when to be elected onto the leadership structures of the African National Congress. That is before the ANC was banned in 1960. You had to be already a leader of, communities in one capacity or the other, for you to inspire others to elect you to lead the African National Congress. So, in a sense, leaders of the African National Congress were also leaders of African communities.
I hear what you're saying, DP, but we're also seeing some campaigning for nomination. And I think that's really where I'm talking about, where it's one thing because we understand once you are nominated by the branch for a certain position and whether or not you accept it, then you're entitled to, go ahead and campaign. But what about in some instances, I don't want to mention names, where people are actually actively campaigning for nomination? Is that a foreign concept within, or is that also something that is that's historically been there within the ANC?
Historically, it hasn't been that way earlier on, but we are now in a moment where campaigning is recognized and allowed. That is why the rules also say, if you do campaign in that manner and you receive support in kind or in money, you should keep proper books of account, because then the organization needs to know that you are not a proxy for other people here.
Right. And that segues nicely into, I think, my last question on this issue, which is how will the electoral committee that you lead, how is it going to monitor the expenditure by the various campaigns?
Well, the rules allow for expenditure on, say, hiring of a venue, a sound system, if it's going to be utilized, and simple refreshments such as still water. Yeah, nothing stronger than that is provided for. And then, of course, so that then you must keep proper books of account for that, because it can be, you should in fact submit a report on that to the electoral committee. Yeah.
And then obviously detailing also the amount of money that you had raised for the campaign.
Exactly.
Okay, so money that came in,
yes,
and then money that was
how it was utilized and so on. Yeah.
All right. I'd just like to then move on to the issue of step aside. Now, we've seen, even before the nomination processes were opened, that criticism of this step aside regulation, and some claiming that it's being applied selectively. Ace Magashule, for instance, believes that. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, the conference came out with resolutions. One on fighting against crime and corruption, and the other on integrity and improving the image of the ANC. And it is in the latter, where the step-aside rule was suggested. The other one, fighting against crime and corruption, also states that the organization must deal decisively with the usage of money to influence outcomes of either meetings or conferences. So the National Executive Committee itself went into a detailed process of developing guidelines around this step-aside rule. And once they adopted them, they apply to whomsoever equally.
Do you believe that it's being applied selectively? As we saw earlier this week, claims coming from Bawuzweli Mkhize, Umamlindi Wesisulu, both of them arguing that, maybe this issue of step aside isn't being applied properly, as well as a potential use of state resources, particularly within the Justice Department, to selectively target individuals to try and take them as we go into this process. Do you believe that that is actually happening?
Well, both of them are members of the National Executive Committee. It is the National Executive Committee which developed the guidelines and adopted them. And so the application, what I hear being insinuated here is that perhaps the NPA or the law enforcement structures are not applying the same energy in ensuring that those who have committed offenses are really charged. So that's outside of the ANC. That's something that is in the hands of the state law enforcement organs. The ANC itself, the guidelines, this rule on step aside, I would say it's being applied consistently and fairly. Because you see, it's not going to stop now. We would say it was applied selectively if it was applied to certain people and then it's abandoned. But rest assured that if anyone who gets to be charged for serious offenses will have, and if they occupy a position of leadership or responsibility, they'll have to step aside.
Do you think it's disrespectful from those members of the ANC who are making these claims publicly that the issue of step aside is being selectively applied?
Well, people tend to want to angle for the best advantage, and I wouldn't put it past any member of the ANC to want to do that. They are always or forever trying to angle for the best advantage in whatever situation they find themselves. But the thing about the ANC is that the constitution of the ANC is very consistent about those who bring the organization into disrepute. The rules are there in the ANC and constitution. And so this step-aside rule is not out of sync with the ANC constitution.
All right. Can we just then move, just considering the time that we have, what's your reaction to reports that former President Jacob Zuma wants to come back into active ANC politics, potentially being touted as a national chairperson?
Well, he's within his rights. I mean, the rules and the ANC constitution says any member has a right to nominate whomsoever and be nominated for whatever position in the ANC. So, as a member in good standing, he's within his right. But as I said, the guidelines for nomination stipulates that the branches should do the nominations, and the consolidation then happens at provincial level. So if that's what happens at the end, he will be within his rights here.
Within his rights, for sure, but would the step-aside rule then apply to him, considering that he is charged with criminal charges?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
All right. Now, as a former president of the country, deputy president of the ANC, you're looked upon by the current leadership, and I think us as a country, for wise counsel. If you were to advise the incumbent president, Cyril Ramaphosa, how should he respond to the issues of the Phala farm robbery saga?
Well, he has stated in public that he will, cooperate with all the investigations that are underway, and to that extent, I think he's adopted the correct stance. Because if an offense was committed, then it will come out. Because what would not work is for an explanation to be given, and then for the offense to be swept under the carpet. So the fact that Parliament is seized with this matter, the Hawks are investigating, Public Protector's Office says that the truth shall out at some point or other. The delay in getting to that point does communicate a message that he's got a case to answer or he's got something to hide. That's the inference from the delay. And so ideally, the clarification should have happened much earlier. Yeah.
We did have to wait 2 years before just the issue of the robbery just came out itself. So to us, it does seem as if that at some point someone was trying to sweep something under the carpet.
Well, that's the unfortunate part, and that's the inference. That's what I was saying, that if there's a clear, plausible explanation, that should have happened much earlier, because the delay and the extended period of silence does give rise to suspicions that perhaps there's something that's been hidden here. Yeah.
Do you think it will harm former current President Cyril Ramaphosa's chances for re-election at the 55th elective conference?
Well, not until either the parliamentary processes and or the investigations by the Hawks come out to say there's a case to be answered here. Once that moment is arrived at, of course it will change everything, because then the rules and the vetting procedures will apply.
Mm. So if I can then just quickly move on to, do you think government's response to the issue of power cuts is sufficient?
No, for the simple reason that at each presser, each time, from a couple of years now, each time the senior leaders of ESCOM hold a presser, the impression, the message they communicate is that, no, a unit broke down here, or we are maintaining, and so there's a bit of load shedding, and then we'll be on course. And yet the situation has gotten worse and worse and worse, to such an extent that the frequency with which load shedding is experienced makes no sense of what stage we are at. You see, whether we are at stage 5 or stage 17, it no longer makes sense. The reality is that it's just too disruptive. So from that angle, I don't get a sense that the leadership of ESCOM has actually understood the gravity of the situation. It's almost like if you have an old skadong and, the kind which is push me before I go, and you think you can take a trip from here to Lusaka.
It's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
How much of what the country is currently experiencing in terms of load shedding and its impact, obviously not just on our daily lives as South Africans, but its grave impact on the country's economy, how much of that should the ANC, as an organization that has been in governance of the country since 1994, how much of that should they accept blame for?
Well, the ANC accepts blame for these failings at Eskom, because when you are in charge of government and therefore the state, part of your responsibilities is to ensure that there's mass efficient transport system, there's sufficient supply of energy, supply of water, and so to the extent that there's a failing there, the ANC has to take responsibility, and the ANC does accept responsibility for that shortcoming.
Today, when we look at just everything and where our country is, you've mentioned some of those: transport, health, water, electricity, education,
health.
Is the ANC...
Infrastructure
in general. Is the ANC fit to govern this country?
Well, you know, in 1992, the ANC held a conference and emerged with a report entitled Ready to Govern. Of course, experience now, practical experience, does indicate that, in fact, we weren't ready to govern. And the misstep are there. I mean, we can identify where we went wrong, where we lost it, and so on. And so the experience is now available to correct, and in order for us to correct the situation, we ought to, at a conceptual level, understand that the governments get elected every 5 years, and by that very act, governments suffer from short-termism, and that is why it's important to ensure that we have a capable state. And this is what the NDP says, that we must create a capable state. And therefore it means at a conceptual level, the state and government should be understood as separate entities, that you need a permanent, capable state on the one hand, so that governments which serve as a face of that state for a term at a time can come and go. But the capabilities of the state and the institutional memory can serve us all well as a country, as an economy, as a population.
Which then, that speaks potentially to the issue of cadre deployment. Because sometimes the DDGs or the DGs in certain departments, if it weren't for their political affiliation to the African National Congress, would not necessarily be in those positions where they are leading those departments, which means that they're not necessarily the best that the state can afford. How do we then address that issue going forward, which is basically to depoliticize the state from the executive?
Yes, we can, not only to depoliticize, but to professionalize the bureaucracy of the state. The late Professor Stan Sangweni gave us the formula, and simple formula was that if you look at the Public Service Act, it vests the authority to appoint senior managers in the president. And his recommendation was that the president should delegate that authority not to these ministers, but to the Public Service Commission, and that the Public Service Commission in turn should not, constitute itself as an interviewing panel for senior managers in the bureaucracy. Instead, it should establish interviewing panels consisting of ad hoc, but consisting of experts and practitioners in that field. So if you're looking for a DG for science and technology, so you get the scientists and the practitioners in that field to do the interviewing.
We've seen the JSC do those exams
for the judges.
Interviews. So it's already within the state's capacity to do that.
That's right.
Right.
Of course, this same procedure, when it comes to judges, is actually stipulated in the Constitution of the Republic, whereas for the public service and bureaucracy in the state, the Act vests that authority in the President. But the President delegates that authority to ministers. Yeah.
All right. It shouldn't be ministers, but it should be...
It should be the Public Service Commission.
Yeah. To just then come back to this issue, former President Thabo Mbeki heavily criticized the leadership of Eskom again this week, but almost as if, to absolve himself of some of the issues that we are now seeing playing out at Eskom, and obviously the successive ANC administrations. Should former President Thabo Mbeki not have accepted some blame for the state's failure to build generation capacity? Because it's, from what I got, what he was saying yesterday, it was like, oh no, but it was Eskom's problem. But for Eskom to have done that, they would have required the assistance of the state, of which former President Mbeki was the leader thereof. Should he not have accepted some of the blame for what we're seeing at the moment?
Well, as they say, hindsight is a perfect science. And if those who are no longer in office are, in a sense, excluded from comment and contribution, then will be this much poorer, because they do so also with a sense of regret that given that chance they would do things differently, but when they were there, that didn't happen. So I think that's the spirit in which President Mbeki is now saying that, look, we have this problem, we are where we are. The best way to address it is to ensure that there's a capable leadership that can take us out of this morass. And he's saying that's an important factor, leadership, because leadership would then know how to recruit the engineers and whatever and so on, and ensure that Eskom keeps the lights on. I think that's the spirit in which he made the comments. That if he is asked that whether in his time things started going wrong, I'm sure he would admit to it. Yeah.
I beg to differ slightly, DP, on the issue of the spirit in which. Because partly, as part of that conversation that former president was having, he seemed to then double down on the issue around what many have described as his denialism on whether or not HIV causes AIDS.
Well, I was making my remarks in relation to ESCOM.
To ESCOM,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then your advice to him around this issue of AIDS denialism? Oh.
Well, you know, when President Mbeki was in office, around this very issue of HIV and AIDS, he accepted when the leadership said to him, look, get out of this issue and let, you know, the scientists deal with it. He accepted at that time, yeah.
Maybe he's forgotten that he had accepted. All right, DP, I don't, again, the issue of time. Just lastly then, sir, two last things from me. The first is, this week, yesterday, we saw another 75 basis point repo rate hike.
Yes.
We currently, as we do this interview, under stage 5 blackouts. The state capture report by Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was really quite damning about the levels of corruption that exists within the state. We saw last year just the lawlessness that broke out and then led to the July unrests. Are we, in your opinion, inching ever closer to realizing, I think, the warning by former President Thabo Mbeki that South Africa is on the precipice of its own Arab Spring?
Well, the issues you've mentioned create toxic soup, so to speak. And every day, literally every day in this country, somewhere, in a township, town, or village, a demonstration is taking place, indicating that you know, communities are not just disaffected but angry, and it's really just the spatial disconnection that is, in a sense, saving us from a conflagration, where these demonstrations that take place every day were connected and coordinated, we would no doubt have much bigger problems to deal with. So, in a sense, we need some example of what is possible, and as such, it's the negative and negative stuff which then gets prominence and in a sense contributes towards the depression.
Sir, thank you for your time. We really appreciate you, speaking so openly and candidly with us as Newsroom Africa, and we really just want to express our gratitude, and we hope that we will get another opportunity to talk to you before, of course, we get to the ANC's 55th elective conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that was our conversation here on Newsroom Africa with former Deputy President and President of the country, Kgalema Motlanthe. From us, for the time being, it's back to you in studio.